If we electrify all energy sectors from wind, water, and solar, our energy requirements go down about 54% worldwide.
There are people who argue that we're in quote unquote energy emergency, that we need to expand fossil fuels.
Mind-boggling that people even think they could be even close in cost. You have no fuel cost for wind and solar.
What gives you the confidence when it comes to the intermittent nature of renewables?
11 states in the US generated 52 to 120% of the electricity they use from just wind, water, solar.
What is the vibe like right now with the energy
In
transition?
order to solve these problems, we need to focus on what works and what can be implemented quickly.
Hey everyone, and welcome once again to Energy Central's Power Perspectives. I'm Kinsey Grant Baker, and I appreciate you pressing play. A 100% clean energy future is both possible and practical. That's the point of view from today's guest, Mark Jacobson, professor of civil and environmental engineering and director of the Atmosphere Energy program at Stanford University. Mark is one of the foremost and outspoken experts on clean energy, and he's spent his career answering the energy industry's transition questions with data, models, and evidence. Today, Mark is joining me for a conversation about the real, honest impacts of the Trump administration on the energy transition and where it all goes from here. Because depending on who you ask, you might get a different answer to the question of whether clean energy is the future. Some people say there's no going back on the energy transition. Some people say it's a load of you know what. Some people argue what counts as clean energy, and some people just plain argue. But what we all know is this: if we want to accomplish even a fraction of our global economic goals, we need reliable, scalable, clean power. My goal today is to help us understand one potential and promising path toward that future. So without further ado, Mark, thank you so much for joining Power Perspectives. How are you today?
I'm great, Kinsey. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, I'm excited for this conversation. This is a topic I love, chatting about and candidly arguing with people about too. So I'm sure we'll have a spirited conversation. And just a reminder to anybody who is listening to this, you can chime in on Energy Central in the comments. I would love to hear what you have to say about all of this. So, Mark, I think it's a good place to start here with a little bit more about you. So, if you don't mind, can you tell me more about the work that you do at Stanford and how you found yourself as one of the most prominent clean energy voices that we have out there today? What's your story?
Well, actually, if you want to hear my whole story, it goes back to when I was a teenager, like 13 years old. I was playing tennis and traveling to San Diego and Los Angeles, California. Back in the 1970s. The air was so bad that you couldn't see very far at all, and it caused scratchy throats. And in fact, y- people were throwing up playing tennis because air quality was so horrible. So I thought, why should people live like this? And I wanted to solve this problem when I grew up. So I decided pretty much then and there when I grew up, to study and try to understand the problem of air pollution in particular at first, and then eventually I added climate to that, like maybe 5 years later, to understand those problems and then try to solve them. I figured you need to understand them before you can try to solve them. And unfortunately, today most people just try to solve the problems without actually understanding these problems, and so a lot of proposed solutions are really useless because of that. Eventually, only for my PhD did I actually get to study the atmosphere, and so I did a PhD studying air pollution in Los Angeles and building a computer model to simulate air pollution, and also learn how to consider weather as well. And then I expanded that computer model to study the global air pollution when I subsequently got a job at Stanford University in 1994. So I've been at Stanford for 31 years now. And I build computer models to simulate air pollution, weather, climate, and also within the last 25 years, clean renewable energy solutions to those problems. So that's what I do today still, is look at solutions, still try to understand the problems, but I'm focusing more now on solutions, and have been developing energy plans for countries, states, cities, and towns to transition to entirely clean renewable energy to solve these problems of air pollution and global warming simultaneously, along with energy security. Our first plan we developed was back in 2009. And so we've been developing country, state, city, and town plans ever since.
I love an origin story. It's great context, Mark. And I have to ask this one follow-up too, because I read this online and I am very curious. I understand you also live in a zero net energy house, that your home generates as much energy as it consumes, all clean energy. You reportedly have not paid an electric bill in many years. Is this true?
Yeah, well, it's not true because I actually produce more electricity from my own home than I consume, so I send the remaining back to the grid, which is lucky. But yeah, starting in 2017, I was fortunate enough to be able to build my own home from scratch, and I decided from scratch I wanted to build it with no fossil fuels on the property, all self-sustainable in the sense that it'll produce more electricity than it uses, and I use the electricity not only for my home but also for vehicles. So I have not paid a gasoline bill, a fossil gas bill, or an electricity bill since 2017, and I actually send extra electricity to the grid and get paid for that. Although the amount they pay has been reduced quite a bit.
It's really interesting, and I appreciate, Mark, talk the talk and walk the walk. It's cool to hear more about that. So we're gonna dig in today to, as I mentioned in that introduction, the clean energy transition, state of play, where we're headed, all things considered, sort of like gestures to everything, right? So to begin, can you contextualize for me the current state of the energy transition? You mentioned that you have been working in and around the clean energy space for several decades now. So at the highest level, what is the vibe like right now with the energy transition, and how does that compare to the conversation, say, a decade ago?
Well, when you think of energy transition, like when we develop plans, there are really four major energy sectors that we look at. There's electricity, transportation, buildings, and industry. And energy is responsible for about 90% of air pollution emissions and about 75% of greenhouse gas emissions that affect climate. So if we could eliminate, well, and by the way, so all those energy emissions are from combustion, or virtually all of them are from combustion of fossil fuels and bioenergy fuels. So if we eliminate combustion of biofuels and fossil fuels, we eliminate 90% of air pollution problems worldwide. And that's 7.5 million people die from air pollution worldwide each year. And that's the second leading cause of death worldwide. So we eliminate that 90% of that problem right away if we can eliminate combustion, and we eliminate most of the global warming problem in terms of what's being emitted. And of course, we want to address non-energy emissions as well, such as biomass burning, methane from agriculture, nitrous oxide from agriculture, and there's halogens as well. Um, but in terms of what we've accomplished so far, so there's been a lot done specifically in the electric power sector. Electricity is about 20% of all end use energy, what we call, and then transportations and industry and buildings are the rest. But electricity's made the most progress, I think. It varies by country. Some countries are there are already 12 countries that are 100% what we call wind, water, and solar in their electric power generation. And so the technologies that we proposed, well, first of all, for our plans, we propose electrifying virtually everything that we can. And so because electricity, it's more efficient than combustion, as I mentioned earlier. And if we electrify all energy sectors and then provide the electricity from wind, water, and solar, that's onshore and offshore wind, solar photovoltaics on rooftops and at power plants, concentrated solar, geothermal electricity, and hydroelectricity, and maybe tidal wave. If we do that, then our energy requirements go down about 54% worldwide because the efficiency of electric vehicles over internal combustion engine vehicles, the efficiency of electric heat pumps over combustion heating, the efficiency of electric industry over combustion industry, and also about 11 or 12% of all energy worldwide is used to mine, transport, and refine fossil fuels and uranium. And if we go to wind, water, solar, we won't need any of those fossil fuels or uranium for energy. And so that saves about 11 or 12% of all energy worldwide. And then there's end use energy efficiency improvements. When you add up all these benefits of electrification and wind, water, solar powering the electricity, we get a 54% reduction of demand. So, having said that, where are we? So there are 12, as I said, 12 countries that are 100% wind, water, solar already. They're small countries. They're mostly dominated by hydropower. Like for example, Albania, Democratic Republic of the Congo. They're hydropower. Norway is mostly hydropower and some wind. Iceland is mostly hydropower, wind, and or such hydropower, geothermal, and then some wind. But there's also uh, there are many countries that are above 50%. There's like 60 countries that are 50% to 100% of their energy generation is wind, water, solar. But worldwide, we're still at like 25% or so. In the United States, interestingly enough, in the last 4 quarters, being quarter 3, 2024 to quarter 2 through quarter 2 or through June 2025, South Dakota produced 120% of its electricity that it used from just wind, water, and solar. It's about 88% wind, 30% hydro, and a couple percent solar. And Montana was about 95, 96% wind, water, solar, with hydro, wind the dominating. And Iowa was on the order of 80% wind, water, solar, with about 78% wind. In fact, there were 11 states in the US that generated 52 to 120% of the electricity they used from just wind, water, solar. And 7 of those states were dominated by wind. And of those 11 states, 10 had electricity prices at least 2 cents a kilowatt hour below the US national average. So it's a myth, in fact, that more renewables you have on the grid, the higher the electricity prices. That's just simply not true. What we see is that those states that are dominated by wind in particular and that have high penetrations of renewables, like these 11 states, 10 of those states have really low electricity prices. There are exceptions. I mean, California, which is ranked 12 on that list, it has really high prices, but they have nothing to do with renewables. They have to do with the fact that utilities are passing on to customers all sorts of extra costs, like transmission line sparks that cause wildfires for the last 6 years. Those billions of dollars of costs are passed on to consumers. There are two gas disasters in California, San Bruno and Aliso Canyon. Those costs were passed on to customers. In California, they had to strengthen underground gas lines as a result of the San Bruno gas disaster, and that cost was passed on to customers. We had underground transmission lines due to the fires. That cost has been passed on to customers. In its infinite wisdom, the state and utilities decided to keep Diablo Canyon nuclear open. All those subsidy costs were passed on to customers. And so anyway, there's upgrading transmission lines. Those costs are passed on to customers. So there's all sorts of reasons you have prices in California that have nothing to do with the renewables. In fact, if you didn't have renewables in California, prices would be even higher. So now internationally, as I mentioned, there are a lot of countries that are doing well in terms of electric power, and China is actually doing amazingly well, not only electric power but also in the other sectors. In fact, I'll point out that China has built in the last 6 months, or at least the first 6 months of 2025, they've built 280 gigawatts of wind, water, solar, mostly solar and wind, and a little bit of hydro. 280 gigawatts is, I mean, it's just an enormous amount. And to put in perspective, that's in 6 months. And so if you double that, let's say for the full year, just hypothetically, you'd have 560 gigawatts. The world nuclear installations are about 440 gigawatts total. And that's accumulated over the last 50, 60 years. And so just in 1 year, China will put it up far more peak capacity, the entire world's nuclear fleet. This is on top of 2024, and China's putting up so much renewables because we've developed plan for China and also 150 countries that say how much wind, water, solar would China need in 2050 to power the entire country for all energy purposes, electricity, transport, buildings, and industry, eliminating all air pollution and about 1.25 million deaths from air pollution in China every year, eliminating all air pollution or 90% of air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from China. And what they've already put up if they continue at the end of this year, what they've already put up, if you scale it forward at the rate they're putting these renewables up, they will be 100% renewable by 2045 across all energy sectors. And versus the US, the rate it's putting things up, it's much slower, like less than a tenth the pace. It won't get there till 2155, so 110 years later. And in fact, China at the end of this year will have put up so much renewables, it will have put up 56% of what the United States needs in 2050 to be 100% renewables across all energy sectors. So anybody trying to claim, well, you can't put up all these renewables is just not possible. China's already put up 56% of what the US needs in 2050 to go 100% renewables across all energy sectors. It's just an amazing speed of transition.
Yeah, it's a staggering statistic, it stopped me in my tracks, and I wrote down 2155 is a long time from now, right? And I think what and it's a good segue too to talk a little bit about the view from Washington. So much of what the Trump administration has centered its policies around has been this idea of global competitiveness, especially with regard to China. So to hear that China is at this pace when the United States is at a far slower pace, I think you said a tenth of the pace, is really, really interesting to square that with what we're hearing out of the Oval Office. There are people in the Trump administration who argued that we're in a quote unquote energy emergency, that to meet rising demand, to keep prices stable, that we need to expand fossil fuels, mining, drilling fossil fuels. I'm curious how the Trump administration has impacted the energy transition in the United States, all this considered, knowing that, in a lot of ways there was momentum, there continues to be momentum, parts of the energy transition where that momentum might not have disappeared, but from, tariffs to budget legislation ending tax credits to everything with offshore wind that the Trump administration has done in recent memory, it's a doozy, and we're not even a year into Trump 2.0 yet. So how are those moves out of the Oval Office and from Trump's deputies on Capitol Hill impacting this transition and impacting the pace that you mentioned?
Before Trump, our pace was less than one tenth of what China is at. And with Trump, it's going to be even less. I should point out, like, there are tax credits that are still in place, but they'll be phased out. So the reason we haven't completely collapsed is there are existing uh, tax credits that are being used, and so there is still this growth. I mean, 90% of all new electric power generation in the U.S. in the last year was wind and solar, or solar and wind in that order. Difference between fossil fuels and renewables in terms of electricity generation is fossil fuels, you need continuous mining and refining or transport and processing of the fuels. And so you have to pay all this fuel costs, whereas wind and solar have zero fuel costs. I mean, it's mind-boggling that people even think that they could be even close in cost, just based on the fact that you have no fuel cost for wind and solar. So you just put them up, and then they're just generating in free fuel until they can't run anymore, which is now 30 years, 35 years. Solar is warranted for 25 years, and then but it's now lasting 30 to 35 years, same with wind. And but even then, you just retrofit it. You don't even have to necessarily replace the wind turbines. You can just retrofit them. Um, so this is why we see in the states with the most renewables, they are very low cost states in terms of electricity generation. And so all Trump is doing is going to be saddling consumers with higher costs because of fossil fuels are more expensive. They always will be more expensive. On top of air pollution, there's a new study: 91,000 people in the United States die every year from just oil and gas pollution. It's about 5,000 from the oil and gas mining and transport, and about 85, 86,000 from the combustion of the fossil fuels. So, he's just by pushing fossil fuels, that's just a recipe for just killing more people. So if he wants to kill more Americans, if that's his goal, that's what he's doing by promoting fossil fuels. If he wants to raise prices, that's what he's doing. If he wants to use more land, I mean, you use way more land for fossil fuels and bioenergy fuels than you will need for wind, water, solar. More specifically, the United States right now, 1.16% of all land is occupied by the fossil fuel industry. I mean, there are 1 million active oil and gas wells, 4 million abandoned ones. There are millions of miles of oil and gas pipelines, there are coal mines, there are storage facilities, there's hundreds of thousands of gas stations. You add all this stuff up, that's 1.16% of US land. On top of that, the ethanol industry, just for growing corn for corn ethanol, to supply only 4% of US transportation energy, That's another 1.24% of US land. So between the two of them, that's 2.4% of US land. If we transition the whole US to 100% wind, water, solar, we need only 0.85% of US land. So it's like a third of the land you need for a clean renewable energy future. So you use more land with fossil fuels, you kill more people, more illnesses, you have more climate emissions, you have higher costs, you also create fewer jobs with fossil fuels. So if if he wants to, in his infinite wisdom, wants to, make America worse by causing all these problems, yeah, just keep pushing fossil fuels. And this is what's going to happen. Not as, I mean, there will be a lot of stuff going on at the state level to keep renewables moving. And renewables are, because they are low cost right now, they will also compete well, but you're not going to get a massive transition like what's going on in China in the US if you're not supporting it. I mean, you need collective willpower to affect a successful transition to clean renewable energy, not only in electric power sector, but also for transportation. I mean, we need to go to battery electric vehicles. And there is a lot of growth of battery electric vehicles, but he's pulling the rug under that as well, reducing American competitiveness and that increasing death rates again. Uh, and same thing with industry. We need to electrify industry. Same thing with buildings. We need to go to all electric buildings as much as possible. All new buildings should be all electric. He's undermining the success of this country and also the health of the country and jobs and energy and money savings and land use. So there's no security in it either because fossil fuels are limited resources. They will run out. And what is he gonna do when they run out? Is he suddenly gonna say, "Oh, renewables are great now?" You can't build nuclear power plants in less than 17 to 23 years in North America and Europe, and 12 to 23 years worldwide, and they have problems similar to other fuels. I mean, they're really high cost, delays, they have waste issues. You have to store waste for 200,000 years. You create weapons proliferation issues when you create more nuclear plants. You have underground uranium lung cancers due to radon from uranium mining underground. Uh, and you have meltdown risks. So you have all these security risks, high costs, delays, and there has been two reactors built in 30 years in the United States from scratch. That's there's less nuclear built worldwide or less nuclear output worldwide in the last year than in 2005. So it's a dead technology, it's not going anywhere, and so he's, like, pushing a completely dead technology. It makes no sense.
Yeah, and, Mark, you hit on a lot of really, I think it's super important topics that are core to the conversations that people who are listening to this episode have in that answer. There are a couple I want to dig into a little bit more specifically, starting with the energy security element that you brought up about the fact that non-renewable resources are called non-renewable resources for a reason. They will disappear, as you mentioned. Uh, Sort of on the flip side, when we talk about resilience and reliability and the overlap of those two things with energy security, a lot of clean energy critics point to the fact that many renewables are intermittent in nature as a reason why they might be incapable or insufficient to rise to the occasion of this, spike in demand that we're facing right now with AI data centers, the electrification of everything. You, on the other hand, argued that we are ready to transition to entirely clean renewable energy systems. What gives you the confidence there where other people are skeptical, especially when it comes to the intermittent nature of renewables? What's the answer there?
Well, there's so many levels of silliness to that whole argument. I mean, just first of all, let's start with AI data centers. I mean, okay, California has the third most data centers in the US, by far the most electric vehicles, so it's electrifying more than anybody else. So it has a higher electricity quote demand. But if you actually look at the data, California's grid electricity demand this year to date is 1.4% lower than last year and also similarly lower than the year before. And why is that? So despite okay, where is this a greater electricity demand due to data centers? Part of the reason is California builds a lot of rooftop solar, and rooftop when people build rooftop solar, they use that electricity first, reducing their need for grid electricity. So California's solution is just build a lot of rooftop solar, and that reduces grid demand, and so or offsets any increases of demand due to AI data centers. And yet So that's the solution anywhere. Why not just if you just build a lot of rooftop solar, you're gonna have a lot less demand for electricity on the grid, and so this fear-mongering problem doesn't exist. But what is Trump trying to do? He's trying to kill rooftop solar. He's trying to kill the solution to the problem. So he's trying to claim there's an energy emergency while killing the solution to this energy emergency. So that's and then okay, with regard to intermittency, South Dakota is 120% wind, water, solar in the last year. How many times has the grid failed? I mean, the grids are interconnected. When you don't have, like when the wind's not blowing one place, it's often blowing somewhere else. Sun's not shining one place, it's often sunny somewhere else. But you have this, we're not looking at wind alone or solar alone. What we're looking at is a combination of wind, solar, geothermal, hydro, and storage and demand response. So batteries are, I mean, hydro right now on the grids, what are the two sources of backup? They're hydropower and gas. Okay. And we're not getting rid of the hydropower. We're using it more effectively if we go to wind, water, solar 100%. We're using that hydropower for backup. Hydropower responds in 15 seconds to a demand. Gas takes 300 seconds to get ramp up to 100%. So hydropower is already better than gas. Batteries respond in 20 milliseconds, so they're better than both. In California, in just is now has on the main grid 11.5 gigawatts of batteries, and these are 4-hour batteries, and all of California is about 16 gigawatts. To put the 11.5 gigawatts on the main grid in perspective, the average power demand on California's main grid is 24 gigawatts. So we're at about 46% of the average power can be supplied for 4 hours by batteries, and all most of those, like two-thirds of those were put in the last 2 years. So it's ramped up like 8 gigawatts of batteries in just 2 years, and that's like and California has 2 gigawatts of nuclear, Diablo Canyon. That nuclear has been around for a while. So in 2 years, California has put 4 times the peak capacity of nuclear. So you can't ramp up nuclear, so it's nuclear doesn't help to meet California's demand in is average is 24 gigawatts, but it gets up to like 50 gigawatts. Well, now it's maybe 45 gigawatts in the summer, some for some hours. You can't ramp up the nuclear at all beyond the 2 gigawatts. Okay, you're not so it's not helping. Adding nuclear does not help to meet demand at all because it's just a flat small amount. But you can just keep adding batteries to meet those peak demands, and that's what we're doing. So we have a lot of solar, growth of grid scale solar in addition to the rooftop solar. That grid solar, in fact, there are 187 days so far this year in California where we've had more than 100% wind, water, solar supplying demand for part of the day, for several hours on average during the day. And when we have more wind, water, solar than we need, the excess goes into the batteries. The batteries are then the electricity is stored until when the sun goes down, and then that's when the peak demand occurs, and those batteries then kick in to reduce the gas. So gas use has gone down on the grid 40% in the last 2 years in California. Batteries and solar, utility solar have skyrocketed to replace most of that gas. And so that's how we keep the grid stable by combining a mixture of renewables, wind, water, solar, plus batteries. And there's also incentives. Utilities give people incentives to shift the time of their electricity use by having different rates at different times of the day. That's called demand response. So these are all tools that are used all the time. And so that's why we don't see massive grid failures with lots of renewables on the grid. Because, in fact, California hasn't had a grid failure in the main grid since August of 2020. So it's 5 years. And we've had much more renewables on the grid and no failures. So it's just a total myth that there's a problem. And, certainly fossil fuels are not a solution to the problem because, they have their own problems in reliability. Like, when there was a blackout in Texas, that was because gas lines froze. And so gas was most of the grid in Texas. And so you couldn't produce any electricity from the gas lines. There were some wind turbines that they're produced ice or they froze and shut, but that was only because those particular turbines didn't have this de-icing equipment on it. So that was an easy fix. But that was only a small part of the grid. It was mostly gas, and also the nuclear went down in Texas as well.
So, a lot of the conversation that we have been having up until this point that I think is really interesting is this approach to the energy transition is not centered on just wind or just solar or just one state, right? It depends on this orchestra of grids and territories and generation sources that is really interesting. It brings up to me this idea of quote unquote all of the above that a lot of states have taken. You mentioned before wind, water, solar, batteries, demand response working in concert. What is your take on, a state like Texas where they say it's an all of the above strategy? We're going to build out renewables, but we think there's a space for natural gas in the energy transition, carbon capture, things like that. What's your perspective on the idea of a quote all of the above strategy to building out the grid of the future?
Well, all of the above strategy is a failure and it's irresponsible. I mean, it's first of all, what is it? What is all of the above? You kind of mentioned it. It's including not only renewables, but gas, nuclear, carbon capture, direct air capture, blue hydrogen, bioenergy fuels, all the useless technologies that are completely not helpful at all for addressing climate, air pollution, or energy security. Specifically, the and specifically just to give you an idea of the fuels that they include in all the above, they're really promoted by the fossil fuel industry, the nuclear industry, and the bioenergy industry. So there are 4 technologies pushed by the fossil fuel industry that are fake, scam, greenwashing technologies. Carbon capture, direct air capture, blue hydrogen, and electrofuels. Those are all totally pushed by the fossil fuel industry, have no benefit whatsoever for climate, air pollution, or energy security. The nuclear industry is pushing small and large nuclear reactors. Again, going forward, completely useless. Small reactors don't exist, they're vaporware. Large reactors are, as I said, take forever, 17 to 23 years in North America and Europe, 12 to 23 years worldwide from planning to operation. Capital cost is like 8 to 16 times that of new wind or solar, and annual energy costs about 3 to 8 times as much, and they're not carbon free. Bioenergy fuels like biofuels, biomass, they create air pollution. They use huge amounts of land for the most part, and also are not carbon free, have huge amounts of carbon associated with them. These are just pushed by people who have financial self-interest in these energies, and they're claimed to be helpful, but they're not. There've been study after study showing these are useless, not helpful. In fact, carbon capture is something that increases carbon dioxide, it increases air pollution, it increases fossil fuel mining, it increases fossil fuel infrastructure, increases costs. I can go on. I don't have enough time to explain it why, but if anybody's interested, certainly send me a message. I'll give you the papers and you can look at that. But okay, but from a solutions point of view, I mean, just ignoring all the problems, from an energy point of view, why is you certainly you can use those technologies and make the energy system work. There's no doubt about it. But if you're interested in solving air pollution, climate damage, and energy security, those are not the solutions you want. Those do not help at all, and they are harmful. You can do it with wind, water, solar, and so if you can do it with wind, water, solar, why wouldn't you do it? If you can do it reliably, low cost, saving lives by reducing health damage, creating jobs, reducing land use, why wouldn't you do it? So you just have to question people, why are they pushing all of the above when there is a solution with clean renewable energy, and there's nobody's ever disproven that there's a solution with it. And you can see countries and states ramping up, and more is being shown to be feasible and possible. And you're, it's just it. The only reason people push this all of the above is due to the self interest of the fossil fuel companies, the nuclear companies, ag companies, and people who are proponents. There are some scientists who either get funding from these groups or just have some affinity to them. Like physicists have an affinity for nuclear energy, and so you have a lot of scientists who are physicists supporters of nuclear energy, but even though it's not logical based on the current state of nuclear energy industry.
Yeah, I am reminded more often than I should admit publicly of episodes of the show Veep. I think it's like the pilot episode of Veep. They talk about the big oil guys, and everything centers around what the big oil people think. And it maybe is a little bit of a truth is stranger than fiction. But Mark, as we're wrapping up today, you have an audience of utility professionals listening to this episode, what would be your message to them about supporting this energy transition? What would you want to impart upon our listeners of the show today about the role that they can play, or that their businesses or teams can play?
I'm going to point out that we have limited time in addressing air pollution, climate, and energy security. We need to solve, I mean, every year that we don't eliminate emissions, 7.5 million people worldwide die from air pollution. So that's immediately we need to change. Climate, similar thing. We need to get rid of 80% emissions within 5 years, 100% within 10 years to avoid even much greater than this 1.5 degrees global warming since the 1850 to 1900 period that we pretty much all got almost experienced. And energy security problems, we want to be able to not only use fuels that won't run out, which is wind, water, solar, but also we want to reduce the centralization of energy so it's safer to have more distributed energy. It's also we don't want to have to import fuels like fossil fuels, so we can produce our own energy with renewables. So there are multiple energy security issues that we want to address right away. So in order to solve these problems, we need to focus on what works and what can be implemented quickly. It's long gone are the days where we can just lollygag and, oh, let's just invest in some new non-existent technologies like SMRs, small modular reactors, or cellulosic ethanol, which was touted as some fuel of the future a while ago. And there's just a lot of these technologies, carbon capture, direct air capture. These are promoted as useful when they're just not useful one bit. Um, we have to focus on what works and what can be implemented quickly. And as we see in China, they put in 280 gigawatts of wind, water, and solar in the last 6 months or first 6 months of 2025. And that is can be repeated worldwide. We said we need to focus on what works and can be implemented quickly. And this will save everybody money, jobs, lives, health, and land. And so, yeah, keep our eye on the ball. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah. And as we finish here too, a lot of, the conversation around the energy transition is rooted in how these stories are told, whether that's the promise of nuclear or drill baby drill or what's coming out of the Trump administration. A lot of these stories impact what actually happens. One of those stories is often that we need, miracle technologies to get to 100% renewables. I understand you disagree with that, that you've said we have 95% of the technologies right now that we need to solve this problem. What's your final sort of message of conviction that we have what we need, and that we can execute on this with that sense of urgency that you just mentioned for the utility professionals listening to this?
I would say even now we've improved that to 97% of the technologies that we need. We have that are commercial. What we don't have, however, long distance aircraft, long distance ships, but we have everything else. We just need to deploy as fast as possible. I mean, that's why not? Why wouldn't we do that if these are the easiest things to put in and they are the lowest cost and they save lives and no emissions. I mean, it just seems logical to anybody who's really interested in solving problems to do this. If you're not, if I would just be suspect of people's motives if they don't want to do this.
So quickly, Mark, before I let you go, we typically end our episodes here with a very quick lightning round. So if you don't mind, keep these answers super quick to the point, and we'll get some hot takes from you. So first up, what is a misconception about the energy transition that you would like to debunk here today?
Well,
Not
that's
including the ones you've already mentioned.
yeah. Well, there are a lot of myths that it requires a lot of mining. I mean, we that's another myth that people say renewables will require a lot of mining. But in fact, if we right now, the world, 83% of all the mined material worldwide is fossil fuels for energy. We would eliminate all that mining. And right now, the amount of precious metals are 1/10,000th the amount of fossil fuel mining. And even if we powered every single vehicle in the world, there are 1.5 billion vehicles with batteries, that would be 16 million tons of lithium needed. That's still 1/1000th the annual amount of fossil fuels mined. In over 100 years, that's 1/100,000th of the amount of fossil fuels mined. So it's trivial amount of mining for a clean renewable energy future versus a fossil fuel future. So it's just orders of magnitude. In this case, 5 orders of magnitude less mining for just transitioning all vehicles, which people claim, oh, you need so much material. You just don't.
All right. Next up, can you give us a book recommendation?
Well, I just read this book by Brian Toon, which is and Alan Roebuck, which is on the extinction of the dinosaurs, and which was fascinating.
And the last one for you, Mark, is there a person, innovator, entrepreneur, company, entity, anything that you suggest our listeners check out in the clean energy or clean tech spaces? Who's somebody to watch or something to watch?
Well, there are a lot of people working on clean renewable energy and 100% clean renewable energy in Europe in particular, like Christian Breyer at LUT Finland and Brian Mathiasen at Aalborg University in Denmark. And there are many others in Australia and around the world. So yeah. So I have high regard for all these people working on clean renewable energy.
All right, wonderful. Mark, thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful and, wide-ranging conversation. I feel like we could dig into a lot of the topics that we brought up today and spend hours and hours talking about it. So I appreciate your, commitment to giving us the sampling of what the transition looks like today, and where we're headed. I think the message to our utilities listening to this is pretty clear, and I would urge anybody listening to sound off. We'll put our contact information in the show notes for people to chime in if they want to. But Mark, thank you so much for joining Power Perspectives today. It's been lovely.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Kinsey.
And a quick reminder to all of our listeners, you can catch every episode of Power Perspectives and Energy Central's other shows on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Subscribe, leave us a comment or rating, and don't miss our other series. And in between episodes, you can see the stories driving the energy business every day by subscribing to the Energy Central daily newsletter. See the show notes for a link to sign up. And I will see you next time. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope everybody has a great day.